letter in the yellow car today. Check it out. So that's the first part. Got my whole interior taken apart. I'll walk you guys through taking it apart as I put it together. It's actually really easy. Not difficult at all. Alright. So when we start putting it together, I'll walk you guys through how it came apart. Super easy. So as far as the center console, neutral. Alright. Essentially, in order to get it out, it just unclips. So you just gotta reach in here into the shifter and pull up on the sides, and then this will kind of follow it out. Now we're gonna put it back. Okay, being careful not to hurt it. You guys will see how easy it was. Simple. There it is. Easy peasy. So again, to get it out, you just grab under here and pull out. And once you get it out, you gotta gently kind of pull this and separate it. There's just some clips under the bottom. Alright, now we're going to do the center dash piece. So in order to get this out, again, it just pulls out. Now be careful, because if you have heated seats, this guy right here has a real short wire harness, okay? So it gives you just enough room to get someone with some small hands in there and unclip it, and it unclips from the bottom, okay? But once you get your hands on the clip, it's not that difficult to get undone. And then as far as the switches and the knobs, they just have these tiny little screws here. I'll show you. Tiny little screws. Socket size that I used, which was actually too big. It's a 5/32, but it was small enough to get the job done. So put this together so you guys can see it. So you just put the heat seater buttons in carefully, clips in. Okay. Now we're going to sit here and connect the wire harnesses and then push it in. There we go. Sweet. Now we'll move on to the dash. We'll finish putting that together. And then we'll do the steering wheel, and then we'll be done. Alright. As far as the gauge cluster goes.
Oh my god, no one cares.
It is comprised of three. The wife did an outstanding job on customizing my gauge cluster trim right here to match the car, black and yellow. It comes apart in 3 pieces. You can see that this backing piece that mates up to the actual cluster sits like this, right? And it's heat welded here. So what we're going to do, what we did was I drilled it out, not too deep. You got to be careful not to drill all the way through the post. That way you maintain the distance. But what we're going to do is I'm going to epoxy it back together, clamp it, and let it sit for 10 minutes or so, wait for the set time to happen. But to give you an idea, also, this is the chrome rings right here, and they just kind of clip on like this. Gentle. So they just kind of unclip, chrome ring, and it's going to sit behind here. And we're going to epoxy it back together. Get a rag so we don't scratch up the front of this. I'm going to mix some epoxy, clamp it together. Now that we've got the gauge cluster bezel put together, we're going to go ahead and throw it in. I'll talk you guys through how it came out. So first, in order to get this out, you've got to undo this bottom bezel right here. Okay, I'm going to show you guys something. Now, one thing that you need to note is that right here, there's a screw that you have to undo, and right there on the bottom there's a screw that you have to undo. So I'm going to go ahead and throw this back in, throw those screws together, and we'll be done with the dash. Again, you just have a plastic pry tool that will kind of just pry everything out. Sweet. Put my button back in. Awesome. Yes, and we're not done here. There's a screw right here. It's the only screw that holds this bezel on. That you gotta take off as well. We just put our last little trim piece back in. Right here, 2 clips. Oh, tuner wire's in the way. Make sure that's out of the way. Alright, so now let's talk about the steering wheel, how to take it apart. Here, inside the steering wheel, minus the horn and the airbag and the switches. Okay, so overall idea for me was to get the bezel off so we could get that done. It's looking sick, right? But in order to get all of this apart, right here, there are your multimedia function controls on the back. Okay, and there's this little plate here, and it has a little notch. what you're supposed to do, you're supposed to stick a little flathead screwdriver in there and pry this sucker out. It's not clipped in there very hard. I was able to do it with my fingernails, kind of pulling it with a screwdriver and then wedge it. And then that comes off. And then on the back side, there's a screw that you undo, and that whole fixture will come out of the back. And then you'll have access to a bolt, a 10mm bolt in there. And that's what secures, on both sides, secure the airbag in place. And once you get that off, right, the bolts go through here. Once you get the airbag off, of course, always disconnect your battery before you take your airbag out. There are explosives in your airbag. It would be a bad idea to do it with power. So those come out, the horn pulls straight out. Just got to undo these plugs right here for your airbag, and then your horn plug. Okay, and then you'll have access to your buttons over here. And make sure when you undo these, there's a tiny little clip. Make sure you undo the connector as well on the back side. Connector, and your switches, and your whole bezel piece will come out as well. I'm lying. You're not done. Once you get these back pieces off and your horn out, there are 4 screws on the back of here. All these are T-series screws back here. Once you take those off, the 4 screws, 2 go through, 2 go into the back of the steering wheel. You can see that's the back of the bezel right there, 4 screws. Take those out, and this just kind of pulls off real nice once you have these disconnected. Now, to get your button clusters out, right, there's 3 screws on each button cluster and a bracket. Okay, so the bracket sits behind the cluster. I don't know, to hold it, but it holds it together whenever I can get this thing to line up, so I can show you guys. See, so it lines up, screws in, and it kind of holds everything in there. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start putting this sucker back together. Put this bezel back. You guys can see what I'm talking about. Good to go. Now we're going to plug in this little plug right here. And this one, I'll show you guys, pick you up. So a little plug right here needs to be plugged in. And then this one right here needs to be plugged in. Of course, if you don't drop it. So this one needs to be plugged in right here. That one plugged in right there. Or unplugged. Not hard to do. You just squeeze the tab. If it's difficult, you're doing it wrong. Yeah, if you're pulling hard, trying to get this thing apart, probably doing it wrong. And then this thing has like cleats. You can kind of push it together. Sweet. All right. Now we can put the back on. we go. Now we're screw it together back here. Get the airbag out. What I'm talking about, show you guys here. There is the thread insert right there. It's going to kind of sit back. So I'm going to plug it all in. Blue goes to blue, yellow goes to yellow. Imperative that the battery is disconnected. Now you guys will see like these orange safety clips here. You guys will have to pull those out to get that plug undone. And then there's one last little plug. Right here. Plug it all together. There we go. Just gently set it in here so as to not ruin everything we just did. Yeah, buddy. Just screw it all back together. And this bolt that screws it in is a 10 mil. Now we can put the rest in. Plug it in. Now you guys will see this guy just pops right in.